Thank you, Madam Chair. It is my great pleasure here sharing a platform with such an esteemed panel on proposition. Before I begin my speech, may I first introduce the proposition panel. Hannah Datani just spoke to you. Hannah is a member of the Secretaries Committee and a first-year student at Brasenose College. Lined up on proposition will also be Suna Guluban Mutaibi. Suna is a member of the Standing Committee and a first-year student at St. John's College. Also on proposition will be Her Excellency, the Honourable Alun Nudambat Asamba. Alun is a Jamaican lawyer, politician, and diplomat. She was formerly a Member of Parliament and Minister of Tourism, Entertainment and Culture. She has served as Jamaica's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom since 2012. And we also have Dr. Shashi Tharoor, MP, speaking on proposition. Shashi Tharoor is an Indian politician and an award-winning writer. He's a former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and came a close second in the 2006 election for Secretary General for Ban Ki-moon. He also served as a Minister of State for External Affairs in India. We all give them a warm welcome and a round of applause. The history of colonialism is one that is paved with atrocities and unspeakable evil. On opposition, we both regret and detest those episodes. We are not here to rewrite history for you. We are not here to defend the atrocities of our forebears. What we are saying, however, is reparation is a uniquely illegitimate and illogical way to confront this historical evil. Now, if you look at what proposition told us, they told us a lot about how colonialism looked like, but never really told us what reparation would look like. I'm going to tell you that. Reparation, at their best, would be a financial payment to those governments or people of former colonies, and I will show you why at best those payments will do absolutely nothing to improve the lives of the people on the ground. At worst, reparation will be a propaganda tool for autocratic regimes within those countries, post-colonial countries, to allow them to blame their shortcomings on British colonialism, to allow them to buy time and rhetoric in order for them to oppress their people more. It is also a tool in which we buy ourselves off our colonial guilt and wash away our guilt in a cheap and monetary way. That is why we oppose reparation. In my speech, I will do three things. Firstly, I will look at the economy of post-colonial countries. Why we think economic reparation, which is basically what Hannah got to at the end of her speech, right? About giving more foreign aid or more money to those nations, wouldn't do anything. Secondly, I'll tell you why couching colonialism in terms of guilt and a monetary payment is uniquely bad and illegitimate. And finally, I want to look at Hong Kong, why we think this is case in point of how guilt-based confrontation of colonial history is uniquely bad. But let's look at what she told us, right? She told us that reparation could also be moral, right? Because we sort of celebrate colonialism. I don't think anyone in this country necessarily celebrates colonialism. I don't think any history textbook in school would say colonialism is a good thing. I think pretty much the unanimous conclusion is that imperialism has done evil. So if what she's looking for is literally a sorry, then I'm not seeing how this debate is going to work. So she has to tell us something more concrete, which has to be financial reparation, and that is what we are opposing here. So let's look at the economics in post-colonial economies, right? The first thing we notice is that this country has already given out a lot of foreign aid. We have ring-fenced nearly £12 billion every year. That is 0.7% of our GDP. We are also a regular donor to IMF and to the World Bank, giving development aid to those countries. No, thank you.
Sorry, sir, a point of order.
Yes.
Madam President, is this allowed under the rules of the floor of the House?
Oh.
Point of order, Madam President. There is no rule, and I'd like you to point me to the rule, which prevents non-auditory, non-violent public displays of protest in the Oxford Union. There's a long tradition of that, and I would ask the member to show me the rule that prevents non-auditory and non-interruptory public displays of protest that are non-violent and peaceful. Thank you very much.
President to interpret in her capacity as chair what constitutes conduct designed to disrupt debates of the society under Rule 71. Thank you.
Please be seated while our speakers are addressing the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So back to post-colonial economies. I've just told you why this country has already given copious amount of foreign aid to help developing economies. So it's unclear how an increase in those foreign aid budget in terms of a one-off reparation would really, no thank you Annie, would really do much on the ground in terms of helping people. More importantly though, we think a lot of post-colonial economies are extremely insulated, which means that an injection of capital, which is what the first speaker wants to tell you, will simply lead to an inflation, increase in prices within the market. Therefore, another reason why it is economically not feasible. But perhaps even more pertinently, a lot of those post-colonial economies are not resource poor. Indeed, one of the drivers of colonialism was to extract resources, as the first speaker told us. No, thank you, Annie. The reason why those countries become economically underdeveloped was because of governance, because of their government unable to redistribute resources in a fair and equitable way. And that is again, no, thank you, why financial reparation, or just saying sorry, wouldn't do anything to help people on the ground. No, thank you. So let me tell you what it will actually do. It will bolster the claims of dictators like Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, who single-handedly perpetrated the hyperinflation in the 90s. His monetary policy perpetrated hyperinflation, and his land reform policy destroyed the economy. You're going to embolden his claims that he can blame everything on Britain and walk away scot-free. He's already buying time. You are helping him to buy more time so he can oppress his people even more. And we regret that. So let me tell you about the discursive problems with reparation and a guilt-based approach to reconciling colonialism. The interesting about reparation or financial payment is that once you discharge that payment, you no longer feel an obligation. There's a difference in moral obligation. Something, for example, if you owe your friend a favor, even after you return that favor, you still think you still feel grateful for that friend. If you owe someone a bunch of money, or return that money, and that guilt is discharged. That is the unique danger of couching colonialism in terms of reparation. Because it's a once-off thing that once you discharge it, it's gone. She says she's not going to quantify reparation, but there's no point debating something and say you want to discharge reparation when literally what she says is that I can't quantify it. So you have to quantify it. At the point at which you quantify and discharge that reparation, the moral burden and the moral link is gone, and that's detestable. No, thank you. Finally, let's look at Hong Kong. Why I think this is case in point, or why this motion must fall. In 1841, Britain took over Hong Kong from China. In 1984, the late Baroness Thatcher bowed down to the pressure of the Chinese government and signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration, where in return of handing over Hong Kong in 1987, China promulgated the Basic Law, which guaranteed Hong Kong some sort of a high degree of freedom according to the Constitution, and the ability to elect our own leader, the chief executive. 17 years after the joint declaration, China finally decided it would give Hong Kong Chinese-style democracy. People can vote, but only vote from a list that the Communist Party has handpicked effectively. What did this country do? Nothing. Nothing except equivocation. Last December, the Foreign Affairs Committee, I will take you later, wanted to visit Hong Kong, led by Sir Richard. It was refused entry by the Chinese government. What did this country do? Barely anything. And that is the problem with casting colonialism in terms of guilt, in terms of reparation. Because that means we are unable to challenge post-colonial regimes that may be more dictatorial, more repressive, and more authoritarian than the colonial counterpart. Yes, we did evil, but the way in which we confront that evil is not of guilt, but of hope. Before I conclude, I'll take the point.
Do you think that Germany should pay reparations for World War II and of the Holocaust?
Germany paid reparation to Israel after the World War II, if I'm not mistaken. But that was for a specific purpose of a country in need of financial support. I've just told you why there are institutions back then. Why I told you there are institutions right now to provide that financial support without the necessary need of aid couched as reparation. We think the mechanism underpinning IMF or World Bank loans are both sufficient and appropriate for this. No, thank you. No, thank you. So back on what this country should do. No, thank you. We think what this country should do is not to feel guilty because we did not perpetuate colonialism. What this country should do is to feel hopeful. Hopeful that one day, through unleashing the full force of foreign policy, through forcing post-colonial governments to act for the betterment of their people, that one day our former brethren and our former citizens will one day be free. That is the only way you can honor the colonial guilt or colonial debt. Not via petty repayment, which is what Proposition wants to do, but via sustained foreign policy intervention, which may be difficult, may be controversial, but still the right thing to do. We stand for long-term change, not one of guilt-based reparation. For all these reasons, oppose